So there's this new government effort that just dropped. It promises to slash the cost of these really life-changing fertility treatments. But maybe unsurprisingly, it sparked this really fierce kind of internal debate, especially about what it actually means to be pro-life in America today.
Right. And this is the strategic move we really need to unpack.
Yeah.
You look at the 2024 Republican Party platform, and, well, its intent was pretty clear. It committed to standing for families, for life, capital L, and it explicitly pledged support for IVF, fertility
Yeah.
treatment.
It wasn't buried in the details either. It was quite prominent.
Exactly. So this isn't just some minor policy adjustment. It feels like a bold strategic move designed really to bolster family formation, especially when, the U.S. fertility rate is, well, it's historically low.
And the actions that came after that platform statement were very specific, aggressive even. We're talking about targeting the two biggest roadblocks for families trying to access this stuff: the absolutely crushing cost of the medication and then the lack of insurance
Yeah,
coverage.
those are the big ones.
So they brought in these most favored nation drug pricing deals, and they created new legal pathways trying to, really expand employer-sponsored fertility benefits.
But that's where the tension just becomes undeniable, isn't it? Because while you have allies celebrating this, calling it the boldest and most significant action ever taken by any president to bring the miracle of life.
Strong words.
Very strong. But then you have this highly vocal segment within the conservative movement, and they're arguing that supporting IVF, well, it's fundamentally contradictory. It clashes with the movement's core moral values.
And that conflict, it really seems to center on the destruction, the routine destruction, and maybe even the commodification of embryonic life. That seems inherent in how IVF often works.
Precisely.
So, okay, our mission today is to really dig into this. First, the policy itself, the hard numbers. How are costs actually being cut? How is coverage expanding? And then we need to unpack this profound moral conversation that's now dividing, some really strong conservative allies.
Right. And I think to really get the power or the intended power of this policy, you have to see it inside that whole America First framework it came from. The bigger 2024 GOP platform, it paints this picture of America as a, quote, nation in serious decline.
Yeah, that language was stark, talking about threats from inflation, unsecured borders, rising crime.
Exactly. And the platform solution, which it frames as just common sense, it demands immediate, really aggressive action on multiple fronts.
Okay, so what were those main action points, just to set the scene?
Well, there were 5 immediate areas called out. First, securing the border, including the largest deportation operation in history. Second, ending inflation, primarily by unleashing American energy. That's the famous drill, baby, drill line.
Right.
Third, stopping outsourcing, trying to become a manufacturing superpower again. Fourth, building the strongest military, the whole peace through strength idea. And fifth, ending what they call the weaponization of government, restoring equal application of the law.
Okay, so a broad, muscular agenda. And within that massive framework, how does the family piece, and specifically IVF, fit in?
Well, that's key. The document carves out this fundamental pillar dedicated to strengthening the American family unit. It explicitly commits, again, to defending life, protecting Social Security and Medicare crucially, with no cuts mentioned there and then, very specifically, pledging support for IVF.
So it's presented not just as a healthcare issue, but as part of this larger national renewal project.
Absolutely. It's a very clear political statement. Supporting access to fertility treatments is being framed as, well, essential to renewing the pillars of American civilization. It directly links growing families to national strength. The policy views IVF access not just as, a niche health thing, but as a tool, a mechanism to achieve that bigger goal. Strengthening families, increasing birth rates.
Okay, so if the goal is strengthening families, and we know, everyone knows, the biggest barrier is often cost. You hear figures like $25,000 per cycle, sometimes more. How did this framework actually translate? How did it move from that sort of philosophical level into the practical steps, the mechanisms for cutting those huge bills?
Well, the main strategic lever they pulled was that most favored nation pricing deal for drugs, the MFN deal. And it's important to understand this isn't just like a simple discount. It's a strategic use of the government's market power, its leverage, to pressure these big international drug manufacturers.
It feels like a classic America First application, right? Using financial muscle to bring down costs specifically for Americans.
That's exactly the framing.
Yeah.
And you asked if applying it to these sort of niche fertility drugs actually has enough force. Does it move the needle on a $25,000 procedure?
Yeah. Is it mostly symbolic, or does it make a real dent?
Well, the data suggests the impact is uh, measurable and pretty significant, actually, especially for that medication part of the cost, which can be a big chunk. They zeroed in on EMD Serono, that's the world's largest maker of fertility drugs. And the deal forces their American prices down to match the lowest prices paid by other developed countries.
Okay, do we have specific numbers on the savings?
We do. CMS, the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, they estimate women could save up to $2,200 per cycle just on the fertility drugs.
Wow, okay. That's not insignificant when you're looking at the total cost.
No, definitely not. And for one of the most commonly used drugs, Gigo and LF, it's projected to be available at an 84% discount off the list price. That's through the government's TrumpRx.gov platform.
84%, that's staggering.
It really is. And there's another piece of that deal. EMD Serono also committed to investing in manufacturing IVF drugs here in the United States for the first time. So that ties back into that broader platform goal of boosting domestic manufacturing.
Okay, so hitting drug price is hard. What else? You mentioned regulatory hurdles.
Right. Beyond just the price, they looked at the speed bumps, the bureaucracy involved in getting lower-cost options onto the market. They used the FDA's fast-track approval pathway. It's a special priority review program. The idea was to speed up the review for a lower-cost fertility drug that's already approved and used over in Europe.
So cutting down the red tape to increase competition faster.
Exactly. It cuts the usual FDA review time, which might be 10 to 12 months, down to just 1 or 2 months. And the thinking is that immediately helps drive competition and therefore lower prices across the board.
Okay, makes sense. Then there's the insurance piece. You said that's maybe a structural game changer for actual coverage. They created something called a new benefit option.
Yes, through the Departments of Labor, HHS, and Treasury.
So why is making it a standalone option? Why is that so key, particularly maybe for smaller businesses or families?
Well, it matters because it sort of decouples fertility benefits from the requirement to offer really comprehensive and often very expensive overall health coverage. This new legal pathway, it lets employers offer fertility benefits, kind of like, well, like they offer vision insurance or dental insurance as a separate package.
Ah, okay. So a company that maybe can't afford a top-tier, all-inclusive health plan could still choose to offer this specific fertility benefit.
Precisely. They can add this benefit without having to fundamentally change or upgrade their entire core health plan, which might be prohibitively expensive. And the estimate is that this one measure could expand IVF coverage to nearly 1 million more families, making that cost potentially manageable, instead of just catastrophic.
1 million families is a huge number.
It is, but this is where it gets, as you said earlier, really interesting, because the very success of the policy in cutting costs and expanding access, well, that immediately throws this moral crisis into sharp relief for many conservatives.
Okay, let's break that down. Starting with the proponents, the ones who frame this whole thing as inherently positive, totally pro-life.
Right. You had President Trump himself saying, quote, "You can't get more pro-life than this."
Yeah.
And the rationale is straightforward. It tackles that historic low U.S. fertility rate. It supports family formation. It acknowledges the reality that, maybe 1 in 8 couples struggles with infertility.
So the focus there is purely on the outcome, right?
Yeah.
A wanted baby born into a loving family, the end goal.
Exactly. The focus is the positive result. But then you have the conservative critics, and they argue forcefully that you simply cannot separate the end goal from the means used to achieve it. Major pro-life organizations are contending that expanding access to IVF, as it's currently practiced, creates this severe moral dilemma. Why? Because the standard procedure often relies on the routine destruction and some would say commodification of embryonic human life.
And some of the numbers cited by critics, like the group Live Action, are just devastating. They claim IVF kills more babies than abortion. That's a direct quote. Because, potentially millions of embryos are created, then frozen indefinitely, discarded, or destroyed in the process each year.
Yeah, the statistics they use are stark. One calculation suggests that only about 2.3% of the maybe 4.1 million embryos created annually through IVF actually result in a live birth.
2.3%.
Right, which implies, a staggering number are lost or remain frozen. And this raises really tough questions about moral consistency for people within the pro-life movement. You hear some critics asking, essentially, how is the government supporting this morally different from, say, the contraceptive mandate under Obama? In both cases, the government is seen as facilitating or subsidizing a practice that results in the destruction of potential life.
And it's not just about destruction, is it? There are also these serious concerns raised about eugenics.
Yes, that's another major line of criticism. Critics point out that a large percentage of clinics, maybe 73%, offer testing for things like sex selection, or even for physical traits like hair or eye color. And the argument there is that this kind of selection reduces children to um, consumer products, things to be chosen and customized rather than gifts to be received.
So it's a critique of the process becoming too much like manufacturing.
Exactly. And you see critics, for instance, from organizations like the Heritage Foundation, they're not just criticizing, they're proposing alternative policy solutions. They call for things like imposing a strict standard of care to prevent what they see as the wanton destruction of embryos, or limiting the number of embryos that can be created in a single round of IVF, maybe following models used in countries like Germany, for example.
Now, it's really crucial here, I think, to bring in the counter-analysis to get the full picture of this debate.
Absolutely.
Because there is pushback against some of the most extreme statistics that the critics use. For instance, that argument that IVF is somehow uniquely wasteful when it comes to potential life being lost. That's often challenged by pointing to broader medical data, peer-reviewed analyses, that show that even through conventional unassisted reproduction, a very high percentage of human conceptions naturally don't survive to live birth, maybe nearly 70%.
Right. That's a really important piece of context. It suggests that a certain level of biological inefficiency, sadly, is just a difficult natural part of human fertility overall, whether it's assisted or not, which makes the moral calculation perhaps more nuanced than just a simple comparison of the numbers lost in IVF versus other scenarios.
Okay, so wrapping this up, what does all this mean for you, the listener, maybe watching this political movement grapple with itself? This deep dive, I think it really shows that a policy designed with one goal in mind, bolstering the American family, supporting life, it immediately creates this intense conflict over the means of creation.
Yeah, the how becomes just as contentious as the what.
Exactly. The policy clearly delivers some measurable financial relief, potentially expands access significantly for families dealing with infertility. But at the same time, it forces this really profound, maybe uncomfortable moral conversation right within the core of its own political base, its own foundation.
So given that the official GOP platform now has this kind of dual commitment, explicitly defending life and explicitly supporting IVF, it raises a really big question, doesn't it? Does the future of conservative policy in this area now require sort of separating that strategic goal, increasing family formation, separating it from the traditional moral concerns about the method, about how conception happens? Or does the focus have to shift entirely, maybe towards non-assisted reproductive technologies, treatments that try to address the root causes of infertility without creating and potentially destroying embryos?
It's a fundamental tension.
It really is, and it's a tension that's likely going to shape conservative policy and debates around it for many years to come.